Today, I want to talk about the Nintendo Switch. No, not the Nintendo Switch OLED, but the Nintendo Switch 2 and why I bought one. This here is my Nintendo Switch OLED, and to be honest with you guys, I have been very underwhelmed with the performance on this device in particular. Everything that I've wanted to play on this is just run really bad. As someone that has a large collection of Nintendo Switch games and just wants better performance, is the Nintendo Switch 2 worth picking up? Let's hop in and take a closer look. The Nintendo Switch 2 hit the shelves with a price tag of $449.99 US or $629.99 Canadian. This was a pretty noticeable price jump up from the original Switch and the Switch OLED. Nintendo have also offered a bundle with Mario Kart World for $499 US or $699 Canadian. Early sales have been incredibly strong, with over 3.5 million units sold in the first 4 days. This unit here was purchased with my own money, and with a price tag like that, I did kind of wince buying it. But I have so many Switch games that were just sitting around because of bad performance. I think it was worth it for me. So what do you get when you buy the Nintendo Switch 2? Inside the box, you of course get the Nintendo Switch 2 with the 2 Joy-Cons. You get the dock. Underneath that, you get a USB-C to USB-C cable, the Joy-Con controller adapter. The dock wasn't here, but I have already set that up. Underneath this part, you get the HDMI cable. This is a HDMI ultra high speed cable, so this is HDMI 2.1. I would recommend using this or a reputable HDMI cable if you want this hooked up to your TV. You also get 2 Joy-Con mouse adapter kits that let it slide much better over the surface of whatever you're using it on. And the USB charger, which is a 65-watt charger. Let's take a quick look around the device itself. On the front of the device, you get your 2 joysticks, the same EBXY buttons as the Nintendo Switch OLED. The Joy-Cons essentially look the same. The only noticeable difference here is the C button, which is the chat feature. Honestly, I have not used this once. On the back, you get the unlock clip for the Joy-Cons themselves, and these pop off really nice. As soon as you get the Joy-Cons close, they just kind of snap into place. On the top, you get the 2 bumpers, which now round all the way around the corner. These are much more comfortable to use. You also get the same digital style triggers, with just a slightly more rounded curve to them. The game card slot is up on the top. You get your headphone jack and another USB-C port. This is actually really nice because I prefer charging from the top of the device when it's in my bag. We also have a large air ventilation on the top, which is much bigger than the last Switch. And on the other side of the top, you get the volume rocker and a power button. When I picked this up for the first time, I was kind of surprised by the size. It feels much more solid than the Switch OLED. I would even go as far as to say this feels like a real proper handheld compared to the Switch OLED, which kind of felt toyish. The only noticeable build quality concern that I have with the Switch is of course Joy-Con wobble. It is still there, however, it's not as bad as it was on the Switch OLED. The right one on my Switch wobbles even more. For some reason, it's definitely not the same as the left side. Still, this hasn't been bad enough to bother me. Thanks to these magnetic locks, they actually sit a lot more solid into the device itself. Now, when I say this is heavy and much bigger than the original Switch OLED, I'm not kidding. This is the Switch OLED. This is the Switch 2. There is a huge size difference between these 2 devices. Just look at that. In fact, the Nintendo Switch 2 is so big, you can compare it to a lot of PC handhelds. The Steam Deck is pretty close in size, however it is a little bit wider, and obviously a little heavier. I see why these 2 devices get compared so often. Similar price, and pretty close in weight. Stepping things up from here, stuff only gets more interesting. The AYN Odin 2 portal is also pretty close in size to the Switch 2. However, the screen is noticeably smaller. This handheld is based on Android, so it runs completely different games. Noticeably smaller, ever so slightly narrower, and pretty close in thickness too. However, the portal does have grips on it. The Switch 2 doesn't. Another handheld that's pretty close in size is the ROG Ally X and the original Ally. Let's line these 2 up and see how different these are. So the Ally does have a smaller screen. However, what the Ally has going for it is more power and definitely better ergonomics. Even with the slightly better ergonomics, it's only ever so slightly wider. Since the ROG Ally X is more powerful, it's going to need a lot more cooling, hence a much thicker handheld. Stepping things up in size even more comes the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus. This one has a bigger screen, again, a more powerful processor, and again, because of that more powerful processor, it has to have much better cooling. This device is actually pretty thin for its size, but the Nintendo Switch 2, again, is just much thinner. And the biggest handheld that I own personally, the Lenovo Legion Go. This is so much bigger than the Nintendo Switch 2. You feel it in the weight as well. This is one heavy handheld. Because this is a PC handheld, again, it is just much thicker. But you get some really nice grips on this. The Switch 2 is very light for its size, but it feels very solid and quite rigid. It also feels a little heavier than the original Switch. The Switch OLED comes out to 436.4 grams. The Switch 2 is just ever so slightly heavier at 556.7 grams. If you're curious about the Joy-Con weight, the old Joy-Cons come in at about 51.6 grams each. The new Joy-Cons are just ever so slightly heavier at 66.5 grams. So in terms of ergonomics, how do they feel on the Switch 2? Well, they're pretty decent. I really like having this rounded edge. It fits much more comfortably into the palm of your hand. Because the triggers and the bumpers are also rounded, they feel very natural under your pointer finger to use. Because this is a much bigger handheld, it does actually make these joysticks a lot easier to use too. The caps are bigger than the originals as well, and much more grippy. If I put these up really closely, you can see that difference. It's very glossy on the original Switch controllers versus kind of a matte finish on the Switch 2. All in all, the Joy-Cons on the Switch 2 are just much better overall. In terms of ergonomics, you don't really have anything to grip onto on the back. However, I do have a really good fix for this, and I'll cover that later in this review. If you plan on using this as is, I would just spread your hands across the back. There's definitely a lot of space back here. If you don't want to use a third-party accessory, the Switch 2 is much more comfortable than the original, just to use as is. All in all, pretty decent for Nintendo. Holding the Switch 2, there's an immediate sense of refinement. This feels much more premium, more solid than the original Switch or even the OLED model. The plastics have a quality matte finish, although it can attract some fingerprints. Regardless, the Switch 2 feels very robust and built to last. I'm actually very impressed. Another welcome improvement is with the size of the face buttons. The old ones are extremely small, at only 7mm. The new ones, however, are 1mm bigger, and it does actually feel a lot better to use at 8mm. Personally, I like my controllers around 9 to 10mm, so this is pretty good. The joystick caps themselves are also bigger at 17.1mm versus 14.5 on the original Switch OLED. The new joysticks stick out about 8mm out of the shell, whereas the old ones were ever so slightly smaller at 6.8mm in height. It's a small jump in height, but it does really make a world of difference. The buttons do feel very similar to the original, ever so slightly clicky, but not too loud. If you're playing this beside somebody, I don't think they're going to be bothered by it. These are quiet enough that I doubt I'd be able to even pick up any audio samples from them. The joysticks are very smooth too. The arrow buttons feel similar to the face buttons. Start and select also feels exactly the same. Ever so slightly clicky, not too loud. The start button feels ever so slightly more hollow. The bumpers are ever so slightly clicky too, but they're still very quiet. The triggers are definitely more loud, and there's more of a hollow click to them. Regardless, I really like the controls on this compared to the original. Not like a full-size controller, but pretty good for a handheld this size. Now we get to one of the most interesting parts of the Nintendo Switch 2, the panel. This is a very large screen compared to the original. The screen is also a significant upgrade over the standard Switch, but trades blows with the Switch OLED. We're looking at a much larger 7.9-inch LCD panel, now with a much sharper 1080p resolution for handheld play. It supports a refresh rate of 120Hz and crucially variable refresh rate, which makes gameplay incredibly smooth. This can also be a game changer for older titles. HDR10 support is also a year. Brightness is decent at around 400 nits. However, being an LCD panel, it doesn't quite match up to the deep blacks and the contrast of an OLED panel. There's also some noticeable motion blur and ghosting. If you're used to the OLED display on the Switch OLED, this ghosting might actually bother you. I noticed it immediately as I was scrolling through my different titles. You can see quite a lot of smearing. The pixel response times with IPS displays are just not the same as an OLED panel. This is just your standard LCD display, so how does it look compared to some other handhelds? Let's take a closer look. I'm going to load this up on a few different handhelds so we can see the differences between them. For these tests, I'm going to have the brightness completely maxed out so the colors look their most vibrant. I was going to compare this to my original Switch OLED, but because this is a digital game, unfortunately I won't be able to. Brightness is pretty similar between the two though. The only thing that I've noticed between these is this display feels more smooth, and the colors look ever so slightly more vibrant. The display on the OLED is just ever so slightly brighter too. I'm going to dim the lights and compare this to a handheld that people often compare to the Switch 2, the Steam Deck OLED. With the light off, you're going to instantly see some more differences. On the Switch 2, the display is obviously a little bit bigger. The brightness is pretty good and the color accuracy is pretty decent. However, on the Steam Deck OLED, it is 720p, so it might not look as sharp. However, what it's got going for it is that color and that brightness. The Steam Deck OLED is much brighter. This display can support up to 1000 nits in HDR. However, this is SDR content. It is just ever so slightly more bright. Personally, I really like the display on the Steam Deck OLED. Comparing it to the Switch 2, the Switch 2 display is just a little underwhelming. Either way, it is usable, and I don't think it's going to bother a lot of people if you're not used to OLED displays. This is going to come down to what kind of panel you prefer. I love the vibrancy and the brightness of OLED displays, so for me personally, I would pick the Steam Deck OLED, if solely based on the display alone. So how does this stack up against the ROG Ally X? With my ROG Ally X, the display is just ever so slightly brighter at 500 nits. The colors also look a little bit more vibrant, at least to me personally. The nice thing about the ROG Ally X is you can have some options to adjust the saturation and the vibrancy of your screen. However, at stock, the display still looks much better. The Ally X doesn't suffer from smearing or ghosting like the Switch 2 does. It's quite an interesting comparison, isn't it? Obviously, the Ally X is more expensive, but it's the same display found in the original ROG Ally, and the Ally V1 can be found cheaper than the Nintendo Switch 2. So it really comes down to the ecosystem. I do prefer the Ally panel. So how does it compare against something a little different? One display I've always been blown away by is the Legion Go V1. Panel on this has always looked much more vibrant and bright compared to a lot of the other handhelds in the arena. This is not an OLED panel, but for an IPS display, it's truly remarkable, and it absolutely puts the Switch 2 to shame. It's interesting seeing different handhelds side by side, especially with the same game. I'm just blown away by the differences between these two panels. The Legion Go V1 absolutely crushes the Switch 2 display. Much more saturation, way more vibrancy, and a lot more brightness. So what about another handheld that I own? Let's check it out. With the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus, this is just another display that absolutely crushes the panel on the Switch 2. We have much more vibrancy and more brightness again than the Switch display. In general, I just find the Switch colors ever so slightly muted, and the display itself is just a little dark for my liking. I only find the Switch 2 really playable in the shade outside. With direct sunlight or even off sunlight, it's just not bright enough. I do wish these colors were just better on the Switch 2 as well. The other issue with the Switch display, you likely won't see in games, even when there's a lot of solid color like there is with this guy here. If you look very closely on the edge of my display, there is a little bit of light bleed. Not horrible, but it is still there. This isn't something that you would see with an OLED display because it's per pixel lighting. This is pretty common on most displays like this. This is not enough to bother me personally, but it's just something to take note of. It is definitely there, and this can vary from unit to unit. This is where the whole panel lottery comes in. Some displays will just look slightly different. It's just going to come down to luck of the draw. The other thing that you might notice is when you switch to the light theme, you're going to see a small amount of vignetting around the edge. This is where it's slightly darker on the edge itself. It's very subtle, But then again, this will slightly change depending on your unit. You might notice more of this compared to the one I have here, or you might notice even less. It's very subtle though. Out of everything on the Nintendo Switch 2, honestly the display has been one of the biggest letdowns and one of the biggest surprises. I love the variable refresh rate, and I absolutely love the 120 Hz. When it comes to other things like colors and the brightness itself, I am slightly disappointed. One area where I'm not disappointed with the Switch 2 is with the performance. This thing is so much faster than the Switch 1. Since we know the power of the Switch 2 on paper, we can compare that to a lot of the other handhelds in the arena and a lot of the other consoles. The Ally X, though, is something entirely different. The theoretical compute power on that device is far better than the Switch 2. For Switch games, this is really improved. Games now feel much smoother. There's no stuttering and no FPS drops in games like Pokemon Violet. Loading is also way quicker on this device compared to the alternative. All the games that have received the Switch 2 upgrade pack are just so much smoother. I cannot go back to playing this on my Switch OLED now that I've tried it on the Switch 2. It kind of makes me wonder in general how we even managed to play a game like this on the original Switch. This is such an improvement compared to the original, it's like night and day. If you hated the original Switch solely based on the performance alone, you will absolutely love the Nintendo Switch 2. In my opinion though, this is what it should have played like though on the original Switch. I don't know why a buggy game like this was released on the original Switch hardware. This game should have just performed better to begin with. We know Game Freak is capable of making great games. We're just essentially just brute forcing the performance with better hardware here. So yeah, performance, definitely incredible. In fact, I have not found a single Switch game that has played badly on the Nintendo Switch 2 as of making this review. I haven't tried Cyberpunk or any of the other Switch 2 titles, but a lot of the Switch 1 games that had performance issues before are now much smoother. Variable refresh rate is also a huge contributor of this, smoothing out the performance so the screen refresh rate now matches the game refresh rate. This makes stutters much less prevalent. This chip packs an 8-core CPU with 6 cores for games and 2 for development. This has an Ampere-based GPU with 1536 CUDA cores, plus dedicated ray tracing and tensor cores for DLSS. This is paired with 12 GB of fast LPDDR5X RAM. This also has 256 GB of storage, and thank goodness it does because microSD express cards are super expensive. I haven't bought one yet because prices in Canada and pretty much everywhere are just atrocious. Keep an eye out though, ADATA, Team Group, and many other manufacturers are starting to join the arena. I'll probably see what microSD cards are like in a couple of months, because UFS storage operates a little differently compared to the M2s in your PC. Definitely want to keep at least 10% free on your internal storage. We don't know for sure if this is UFS 4.0 or what, but it's always just good practice just to leave a little bit of a buffer. This ensures your storage operates at decent speeds. It will drop significantly as it fills up. The microSD card slot sits underneath that stand, so if you do find one on sale, you can expand the internal storage. These are much faster than your traditional microSD cards. If I was to compare a microSD card to a microSD Express card, these are upwards of 8 to 9 times faster. With the hardware and AAA games now coming to the Switch 2, this is the reason for this storage jump. Bigger games need bigger textures, which means you have to have a faster card to manage all that. For connectivity, Wi-Fi speeds are decent. I was able to exceed 379 megabits per second downloads with 22.3 megabits per second uploads. I've seen some other people have issues with their Wi-Fi, but mine doesn't seem to have that problem. Another area vastly improved from the original Switch is the eShop. I had so many issues waiting for the eShop to load, and it just freezing on me with my original Switch OLED, that sometimes I would just give up and buy it on the computer and let that download to the Switch instead. However, this new eShop changes things entirely. I wouldn't mind shopping on here, especially with how fast this loads. Even if I hold this down completely, there's barely any loading. Everything seems to load up relatively quick. You can also see some of the gameplay videos play when I hover over one of the games. It's pretty neat. This is one of the big reasons why I did not like this Switch. Just the performance. I'm so happy with the level of performance I'm seeing with this new release. It's just so much better. The Switch 2 packs a 5220 mAh battery. Real-world playtime for demanding AAA titles with 120Hz and HDR active is around 2 to 2.5 hours. Lighter indie games or retro titles can stretch that to 4 to 6, especially if you dial back the screen brightness. It's comparable to the Steam Deck with heavy use, but generally less than the Switch OLED if you're pushing new features. Thermally, the Switch 2 runs pretty decent. Temperatures on the back near your hand are around 35 degrees Celsius. It cools out to about 33 in the center. It seems to be mostly up near this right Joy-Con. Around 36 is the hottest I'm seeing. That's at around 96 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a temperature unlikely to bother you. 35 degrees is warm, but it's definitely not hot. Now that we've looked at the hardware itself, what are some accessories that I could recommend for the Nintendo Switch 2? There's a few really good ones out there, so let's take a closer look. Just a quick disclaimer as well, all these companies did send these accessories out for a review, but they're not seeing this video beforehand and they have no input in what I say. They're also not paying me for this review. First up is Tomtoc's new carrying case. This is absolutely beautifully designed. So what makes this carrying case really nice in particular? This has a very smooth texture to it. It's almost like seatbelt style material. There's little bumps for all the controls. Back has 2 rounded edges and it's very rigid. There's very little flex. Tomtoc zipper quality is also really good. There's a nice little zipper handle here to pull it from. The zipper doesn't get stuck and it's very smooth. Inside we find a little cushion at the top to stop the console from sliding around. There's a few different spots to put your games. There's 12 slots in total for your game cartridges. You also get these little cards here where you can put your name and your contact information just in case you lose the case itself. And hopefully the person that finds it is a very honest and thoughtful person. It would obviously suck to lose a console this expensive, so this is a very nice touch. The Switch 2 fits very snug into this case. There's a little bit of wiggle room, but that's not a bad thing. However, once you close it, it doesn't move around. Because there's a little bit of space, some of the grips might fit in here too. Closing this up, the Switch fits really nice in there. It's not rattling around in the case either. You also get a very robust carrying strap up on the top. This feels very high quality. All in all, excellent case. This is available on Amazon and the price is pretty decent. If I was to pick this or the official one, I really trust Tomtoc to do a good job with their cases, and I've been using them for many of my other handhelds, like the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally. So if you're in the market, not a bad case. But what else does Tomtoc make? If you guys watch my channel a lot, you're gonna know that I love slings. They're so much easier to take around than a random case. If I'm out and about, a sling is what I'm gonna take. This is a very small travel sling. However, it fits the Switch 2 perfectly. That's because it's designed for it. This can also fit other handhelds really well, like the Odin 2 Portal. You get a nice seatbelt style strap. This is adjustable and it's very rigid. The buckles are made of plastic like all their other slings, but I've never had one of these break. There's also a nice, bright, vibrant orange handle up on the top and some subtle branding on the front. There's also a very large zipper on this one. Usually there's zippers that are a little bit more subtle. Inside, you have a large pouch at the back for the Switch 2. This is also foam padded, so you're likely not to scratch your Switch. I like how easy it is to get the Switch in here. You can put the whole console in there, or you can take the Joy-Cons off and put them in the little pouch up at the front. There's also a little strap to hold it into place, so it doesn't move around when you're out and about. You also get some game card slots on the front here. There's 4 up on the top. I did have to take that out so I can show you this a little bit better. But there's a pouch up in the front. This would be really good for your travel charger or your USB cable. Down at the bottom, there is also another pouch. And there's ample room in here. You could put something else, maybe a couple games or something. You might actually be able to fit the entire dock in here because there is a lot of space. Honestly, I love this little sling. This is going to be great for a lot of my ARM handhelds, including the Nintendo Switch 2. However, my favorite travel sling is the one that I've been using for a year. This is also from Tomtoc, but this is designed for the Steam Deck. This means that it's a lot bigger bag overall. This one has a large foam pocket in the front, and it also fits the Nintendo Switch 2 really well. There's ample room in here for a lot of other things. You have a pouch up here where I've been storing cables. There's also a little pocket in here where you can put something like a travel charger. I like the slim Aohi one that I reviewed a little while back. Or you can put things like your wallet in here too. The nice thing about this one is that you can bring things like a charger, your headphones, or a battery bank. Another company that offers great cables is Sharge. This is a 240 watt charging cable. That means that this will be able to charge any handheld that I own at max speed. There's no handheld that I personally have that goes over 100 watts. Even the Aohi Starship battery bank doesn't charge over 140. This will be future-proof for a lot of different handhelds down the road. Get some solid metal tips, and the cable is very malleable. This means that it can orient itself really nice into any of these travel bags. They also have a nice leather clip with it, so it holds the entire thing together. This is a great cable for the Switch 2. Sharge makes very high quality charging accessories. Gonna be taking this with me with my Nintendo Switch 2 and my x86 handhelds. This will charge everything that I have, and it's a decent length at 6 feet. I'll leave a link to all these accessories down in the description below if you're interested in picking any of them up. So you got a nice cable, you got a nice travel case, or a sling. What else are you gonna need? Well, you're probably gonna need a good charger. There's a few different ones to choose from. Sharge sent me this one to take a look at. A good thing about Sharge and other big companies is they're going to take great care to make sure that this delivers reliable power to your devices. The first USB-C port will charge at 140 watts. Second one will charge at 100 watts. And the USB-A port will charge with a maximum of 30 watts. This comes with the actual charger itself and a couple different accessories. So let's see what's in the accessories box. This was rattling around, so I'm kind of curious to see what's in here. This is kind of interesting. It comes with some travel adapters, which might be really nice if you're going out of the country and you want to bring your Switch 2 with you. The nice thing about the Switch 2 is you can use a lot of these chargers with it safely. Just make sure it's not one designed to only output one type of voltage. High quality chargers like this can do variable voltage. I've seen one charger that I had that did 30 volts. It didn't have these adjustable voltages. You definitely don't want to use something like that with any specific handheld. So let's take a closer look at this charger itself. I gotta admit, this feels solid. The one that they sent over is orange. It's pretty decent size too. You have your 3 USB ports. You got the one up at the top, which does the full 140 watts. However, you can plug anything into this because it'll adjust it as needed. I would put this one with your handheld, and maybe the other USB-C with your phone. The USB-A could be good for charging something like headphones or a retro handheld device. And the USB-C port also folds in. That's pretty nice to see. This means it'll fit really good into your bag. It's also very narrow. I like that. It's a great charger for all my handhelds. The last thing that I like to bring with me is a battery bank. The one I've been taking with me is this very small INIU. This supports fast charge up to 100 watts. This is also a relatively large size at 91.25 watt hours. I've been using this 100 watt charging port to charge all my handhelds. This will charge something like the Nintendo Switch probably about twice. Decent battery bank and good value. If you want something a little bit more premium though, you can get something like the one from Sharge. This is the Shargeek 140 watt power bank. The only difference from this is it has a slightly smaller capacity, but it's also slightly narrower. This also has a nice on-screen display, so you can see how fast something is charging. This is 20,000 milliamp hours, so it's ever so slightly smaller than the INIU one, but you also get faster charging at 140 watts. This also offers variable voltages, so it's safe for your handhelds. This one also comes with a nice USB cable, so let's open it up, take a closer look. It comes in a nice transparent shell. It looks really cool. You can see all the different capacitors and the LED readout. It's a pretty sweet little design. It's actually a lot smaller than I thought it would be too. This is also airline safe, so you can take this on flights. All in all, pretty decent little design. I really like this. You can turn it on and off with this little button on the front. Holding that down should bring on the display. 63% battery left, and it tells you how long it takes to charge. This actually kind of reminds me of a Nixie clock. Absolutely love those things. I want to kind of get one for my office eventually. There is also an accessories box with this power bank. If I bring this with me in my travel sling, it's definitely going in this little bag. and you also get a USB-C to USB-C. This cable will support 100-watt power delivery, definitely fast enough for all my handhelds. Because the battery on the Nintendo Switch 2 is not as good as the OLED, you definitely want to bring a battery bank if you're going to be playing this all day on and off. Regardless of which handheld I bring, I always bring a power bank with me. You never know when you're going to need it. The cool thing about this is it shows your battery charging. You can see the percentage of the battery bank, how fast the Switch 2 is charging, and how long it'll take to charge the Switch 2 at this current wattage. However, this one is almost full, so it does slow down as it gets closer to full. This charges much quicker when it's closer to empty. Cool feature though, I like seeing how quick it's going to take the charge. I've never seen this on any of my power banks or chargers. One thing that I would have liked to see is maybe one more USB-C port. However, as mentioned, I only use this to charge one thing at a time. I'll usually leave this to charge my device while I'm at work, and then when I go on my lunch, it's already fully charged and ready to go. I've been taking a power bank with me for years. It's an indispensable piece of tech. This is a really good balance in terms of power banks in regards to features, size, and weight. And the last accessory that I want to talk about is my favorite grip. However, be warned, this grip does not work in the dock. The grip I'm referring to is the Savage Raven grip. This one has a nice grip on the back. They also have some texture on the grips themselves, and there's a flat part on the bottom, which equates to a free stand. You get cutouts for all your different ports. The build quality is solid, and there's nice flex. When the Switch is in here though, it holds it and it's very rigid. This feels similar to the ROG Ally, which has a much better improved ergonomics over the stock Switch. As mentioned, this has a stand now, which means if you want to play this at lunch, you can prop it up on a table and play it that way. Absolutely fantastic grip. This also resolves my Joy-Con wobble concerns. So since I play mostly in portable mode, this is what I'm using. This effectively holds everything into place and it just feels really rigid. I can't recommend this enough. However, you cannot use the stand with this as well. You have to rely on theirs. It is a little wobbly, but as long as you don't push it, it's still a decent little stand. So the downsides of this would be definitely the lack of being able to use the integrated stand in the Switch 2 itself, and the lack of being able to use the dock. But so far, the best grip that I found for the Switch 2. If you're interested in picking any of these up, make sure to check out the links in the description below. So the Nintendo Switch 2. The pros of this are significant performance leap with DLSS and ray tracing capabilities, a beautiful 1080p 120Hz VRR handheld screen, vastly improved docking experience with 4K output, enhanced build quality with magnetic Joy-Cons, new features like game chat and Joy-Con mouse control, and excellent backwards compatibility. I haven't found a single game that this hasn't been able to play yet. Cons of this system are definitely the battery. Battery life is a trade-off for the power. That LCD screen isn't an OLED. I do wish that the colors were more saturated, and the screen is just a little dark for my liking. Joy-Con drift is also a concern. However, GuliKit has also mentioned that they're working on some Hall effect joysticks for this. And when I get some, I'll show you how to install them, so make sure to subscribe. MicroSD Express cards are pricey and a necessity for storage, and the initial console and game prices are also much more expensive, which means I'm unlikely to buy many games for this. I'll likely only ever get the exclusives that I can't buy on my PC handhelds. If something's on Steam, it's going to be much cheaper, and that's where I'd likely buy it. So at $449 US or $629.99 Canadian, the Switch 2 is a premium Nintendo offering. Its value lies in those exclusive Nintendo experiences, the unique hybrid versatility, and impressive new tech to their ecosystem, like DLSS. This is for the dedicated Nintendo fan, anyone wanting the best way to play Nintendo's past, present, and future library, and for those looking for a modern, powerful, yet accessible console. It's not trying to be the Steam Deck, which offers a vast, often cheaper PC library, but a completely different ecosystem. The Switch 2 is about that polished, curated Nintendo library. So what's the final verdict? The Nintendo Switch 2 is an interesting handheld and honestly a complicated recommendation. The performance leap is absolutely welcomed, and it does a fantastic job of refining the original's weaknesses. But in the end, this is a refinement, not a reinvention. It doesn't quite capture a new kind of magic. To someone disappointed by the Switch One's performance though, this is absolutely worth it. Thanks for sticking around during this deep dive review into the Nintendo Switch 2. I'm really curious to hear your take. Is the sheer performance boost enough to justify the price? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this review helpful, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more handheld content, and make sure to ring the bell for more tech deep dives. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.